Hello, happy Friday. I'm hoping you can see my screen. If not, we're off to a real bad start. I am Jared Money, and I thought that we would start this talk out with a bit of a fun fact about myself. I was homeschooled from 5th to 12th grade, in which, by the way, this is the intro of the talk. I already forgot the first slide. This is banger. All right, let's go. The intro of the talk. I was homeschooled from 5th to 12th grade. That meant that my mother was my math teacher, my gym teacher. My father was my principal. I was the fastest and slowest kid in school. And my mom was also in charge of science class. And she knew that that was my favorite topic. So more so than in other classes, science class would involve going somewhere or often misusing a bunch of kitchen utensils for the purpose of a science experiment. So one morning, I get up, I mosey my way out to the living room, and sure enough, the table has been cleared off, and there's a number of different bowls, ramekins, and different cups all lined up in a row. In one, there's golf balls. In another, there's pink Himalayan salt, very chunky. In other, there's small ball bearings all bumping into each other. You get the idea. It's about like consistency and density. On the far end, is my new best friend, a small little cup of powdered sugar. Now, I'm not 6, I'm like 13, but it's 9:30 in the morning and a cup of powdered sugar has entered the scene. That is now all I am focused on. So I am thinking in my head, how am I best gonna make a show of me diving in to all that sugar? So she teaches her lesson, which I've now subsequently forgotten, and she gets to the powdered sugar. And as soon as she does, I lick my finger, put my plan into action, scoop myself a heaping mouthful. I don't know if you've ever had the pleasure of a mouthful of baking soda, but it is not nearly as funny as my mother thought that it was. And you missed out because it taught me the importance of testing. And that is rule number 1 for today. Testing is important. Who am I? I am Jared Money. I am a software consultant here at Solution Street, and I will be subjecting you to my opinion on testing over the next 40 minutes or so. Any questions, please refrain until the end. We'll have plenty of time for that. I will probably go well under time. So please have a list of questions for me at the end. Before we get started, we need a bit of some groundwork. We need some terms. Oh, and by the way, I am a software consultant at Solution Street. I specialize in front-end development, specifically with React. Here's some terms we need to know. React, what is it? It's a JavaScript framework that, as they describe themselves, build user interfaces. Sorry, JavaScript library. Don't call it a framework. I just committed a cardinal sin. It is, by their own words, a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. What is the DOM? The DOM is, and this is going to read like it came from the official documentation, the document object model is the data representation of the objects that comprise the structure and content of a document on the web. Do you have any idea what that means? Because I'm still thinking of this guy. Yeah, me too. Okay, so the document object model takes your document, let's say HTML, converts it into objects that JavaScript or a library like React can then interact with and update. This is how JavaScript updates web pages, and it's how React does its thing. Jest, we're almost there. 3 out of 5, we're almost there. What is Jest? What does it have to do with the other two? Jest is a test runner. What does that mean? It says, hey, tests, and they all come back. Yeah, boss, do your thing. And then they all, in order, do their thing. Tests that you wrote. It runs the tests. It also provides a handful of assertions, things like expect, and because it wants to be Shakespearean, to be and not to be. There's also a library called Jest DOM, which provides an even larger number of assertions. We will be using that in today's talk. And the final two, they come together. What are they? They are Enzyme and RTL. Why are they together? Because they serve the same purpose. Here comes some more straight from their documentations for you. Enzyme calls itself a JavaScript testing utility for React. And React testing library describes itself as a very lightweight solution for testing React components. They are both solutions. They are both libraries that provide specific opinionated tools for testing your React components, performing unit tests. So React, it's how we do all this stuff. DOM, it's what we talk to do the stuff. Jest makes sure the stuff gets done, and Enzyme and RTL make sure that it's easier on us, and they hold their own opinions. Cool, that's a lot of groundwork in 5 minutes and 45 seconds. Why test at all? That is a valuable question, especially if you're expected to spend the next 40 minutes listening to me talk about it. Why should you test? Well, honestly, I've already answered that question, so this doesn't happen. But there are larger answers. Let's get greedy. I don't know about you guys. When people describe testing to me, this is what it sounds like. Oh man, dude, the rainbows have rainbows. The puppies are perma puppies. You in testing land, you don't even have. They just appear. There's actually a scientific paper about it. That's what it comes across to me. So let's imagine the testing end game. Let's imagine Greenland, not Greenland, but Greenland, not Greenland, but Greenland, where everything is green, where the greens grow on greenies. In Greenland, all tests are easy to write. That's just a de facto. That's just something you get for punching your ticket. All tests are easy to write in Greenland. I already want to get there. It's easy to know what to write tests for in Greenland. It's easy to know how to write them. Components are new to you and easy to understand in Greenland. This is a big benefit of tests. Tests that are concise, tests that do their job well, clear and concise, they work as documentation. Who hasn't opened up a new component, looked at it and gone, because I know I absolutely have. And tests, when done concisely and clearly, work as documentation. That's a big one. Refactor your code fearlessly, with confidence, without breaking your tests. And you can push to prod on a Friday. Why? Well, because we trust our work. Why do we trust our work? Because we trust our components to do their job. And why do we trust our components? Because we trust our tests. So Greenland makes all these promises. Not only does it make components easy to understand, not only does it make refactoring your components so much easier, but it guarantees you didn't break anything. All of those things that guarantee that, they're easy to write. And you push the prod on a Friday and don't look back. Cool. Brief, ever so brief summary of how I got here talking about this. And then just wake up one day and go, hey, let's spend 40 minutes talking about testing. First, I had to get to testing at all. So I was a junior developer like everyone, and I was so very frustrated with my code not working. I call it the jump rope problem, where you feel like you have two separate issues, and then when you pull on one, the other one moves equidistant apart, and you just can't, because it's like a jump rope around a tree. There's nothing you can do. Oh man, it made my skin crawl. And it was amplified by the fact that I was a junior dev. Other people can do this. Other people can get their code to work. This isn't hard. Why is this hard for me? I'm in the wrong job. Those kinds of thoughts I think are familiar to everybody. So I had to get into testing it all. How did that work? Well, I got regularly fed up with my code breaking and expressed it to my boss. There has to be a better way to do this. And there is. He introduced me to testing. He said, everything I just said to you, and then kind of just go, give it a try. Cool. I was grateful. I was thankful. I went home. I learned more in my own time, but that's great. I found it difficult putting it in my daily work. It takes more time, particularly when you're new to it. It is an extra source of frustration, as I've already mentioned. And I didn't know if I was doing it right. I didn't know what to test. Deadlines also always exists. So all those things combined lead to my team mandating that testing be implemented. On any new components or work, we have to do testing. Mocha and chai, enzyme ingest, we tried a number of different things. We ended up with enzyme ingest. You recognize those terms. So I struggled with it some more. As a team, we started to see some benefits from it. And since then, that was about 2017, I've tried to write quality tests when and where applicable. I like to think I've succeeded 25% of the time, but you're always looking to get better. You're always looking to improve and to learn. And tests are a great way to do that. It taught me that I did not know nearly as much as I thought as I did. Anyway, thank you, slide. Very helpful. Anyway, quick recap. Rule number 1, testing is important. We want to get to Greenland. How do we get to Greenland? Well, we need some tools. I think we mentioned them earlier. RTL and Enzyme. Wow, what a segue. Such segue. Amazing. Such segue. Wow. Even a segue. Incredible. And now for the main event, for what you purchased your tickets for. Ding, 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 ladies and gentlemen. RTL versus Enzyme. And fight. And your winner is RTL. Ladies and gentlemen, I hate to be the bearer of bad news. Enzyme is dead. I have been Jared Money. Thank you so very much for listening. And I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Now, here's my fear. Was the walking off screen gag twice a little too much? I think it might have been, but I saved it by running back in. Enzyme is dead. That's not me saying it. That's the maintainer of the de facto enzyme adapter. You say, Jared, you totally forgot to mention what that was earlier. What is an enzyme adapter and why shouldn't I be afraid of it? An enzyme adapter is very simple. You have enzyme over here, right? And it's your utility for doing all kinds of things with React components. Then you have React, which is responsible for making React components. React does some radical changes. Enzyme doesn't want to have to do that too. So there was an officially supported adapter that eventually later became community supported that you then have to iterate through. If you've worked with Enzyme, you know Enzyme Adapter 16, Enzyme Adapter 17, etc. So the de facto standard React 17 adapter, its lead maintainer and creator, on December 20th, 2021, that Enzyme is dead. Now, does that count as a technical knockout? If your opponent shows up deceased? I don't know. But before we declare Enzyme dead, let's take a step back. It started its life as a lovely little package at Airbnb. It then went on 5 years later to have 500,000 downloads a day. That's one big baby. Look at this, look at that chart. But then it just kind of stagnated or at least stopped growing. Maybe there's just that many React developers that are interested in testing. So it started as a wee little baby package and turned into this monster. But in between those two things, it transferred from being a product of Airbnb to an independent organization of its own. Now, here's the first signs of death. This is the first time a doctor would start looking at you a little funny, make that face that you never want to see them make, where they just kind of go, huh. That long silence was there for effect. Last non-custodial commit was in September 2021. What does that mean? It means the last commit that wasn't saying, here's an update to our docs, or here's updating some dependencies so we're not just flat out unusable. The last commit that fixed a bug or added a new feature was in September 2021. And subsequently, I'm so sorry, I don't think I said his name, Wojciech Maj, so sorry, Wojciech Maj, or Wojtek Maj, let's get back here, wrote his post 3 months thereafter. You say, Jared, it looked a lot like you went October, November, December in your head just then. Totally did. All right. About a year later, a little more, React 18 is released, so it's time for a new adapter. As we explained, React does a bunch of things, Enzyme just doesn't, and then an adapter has to come along and make sure that they can still talk to each other. Well, here is what Walsh Tekmaj had to say about that. I quickly realized that the API changes in React 18 meant that a React 18 enzyme adapter will not be possible without a huge work of not only the adapter, but also enzyme. He later on wrote, trust me, it's not going to happen. It's over, no more stepping stones, and certainly no more official adapters. Now, this is not the end all be all. This is not the single source of truth. Someone else could come over and pick up the mantle, but I do trust that he is in a position of authority and interacts with those who are to make statements like this. And the community as a whole has moved on. Or so I say. The React 17 adapter, a year after that blog post, is currently at its peak usage. So what does that mean? Long live enzyme? Also, apparently I'm 12 years old again. Well, let's update that chart. Let's put enzyme and React testing library in there. Well, now this tells a different story. What does this say? This says enzyme was alive up until what? Up until about 2020, middle 2020. 2021 was really the year of RTL. We also see that adoption of RTL increases while there's an ever so slight decrease in enzyme usage. So there's a couple of reasons this might be happening. Perhaps the community was better primed for testing in mid-2019 than in early 2016. And that's why the adoption took up so quickly. Perhaps RTL is easier to use. Perhaps the value proposition of it is made clearer. You spend 30 seconds looking at RTL, and you spend 30 seconds looking at enzyme, and one convinces you to keep looking. Maybe there's just more developers and projects. Green is now RTL, and blue is React. And this really tells the whole tale to me. Enzyme was the de facto standard testing methodology for React components up until mid-2020, officially 2021. The community as a whole has seemingly agreed, and new projects, new developers coming in seem to be correlated with the growth of RTL. So I am now not just the developer of the adapter, but those couple extra facts in hand, rip enzyme for sure this time. So we've now killed an entire package. You came here for a fight, now there isn't a fight. Do you feel deceived? Don't. You're gonna learn some cool stuff. What is RTL? Also, I hope your lunch is delicious. I'm going to enjoy some water here real quick. All right. What is RTL? Well, let's take a step back. RTL is a wrapper of testing library. DOM testing library is the core package created by Kent C. Dodds. He describes himself as an educator and trying to make the world a better place by teaching you how to make quality software. I believe RTL absolutely fits in that swim lane. So be sure to follow him on Twitter. He works on cool stuff. He tweets cool things. And specifically, there's a mantra that's attached to the testing library suite of projects. The more your tests resemble the way your software is used, the more confidence they can give you. Let's read it one more time. The more your tests resemble the way your software is used, the more confidence they can give you. I cannot stress to you enough how core to the philosophy of testing library, or RTL by extension, how core this is. The entire thing is centered around this mindset. So let's dive into it. What does that mean? Well, it's the second rule out of 3. Took a little while to get here, but we made it. To me, it means to test what facilitates communication. Well, that's even more confusing. Test your functionality, not your code. And what is your functionality? What is a UI? What is React's job? This is something that's taken me many years to come to. And I'm excited to see how it evolves. My job as UI developer is to facilitate communication. If I add padding to something, I'm not, unless that is imperative to how it's laid out so that the user can see it. But let's just say I'm adding some extra padding. That is not facilitating communication. It may make that communication easier or more appealing, but I'm not going to test that that padding is there. What I want to test is, how does the user talk to me, the developer, or more so the code that I wrote, the code base that I wrote that is meant to interact with them? And how do I, as the developer, interact or provide tools? How do I communicate what that user's choices are? That's the purpose of UI, to facilitate communication between your data and your user. And my job is to reflect both of those as the UI dev. So I want to test what facilitates communication. I want to test how my software is used. Great. That's a lot of talking about testing. Let's test something. I'm primed. I'm ready. You guys ready? Are you guys ready? I felt like I was like getting ready to go raiding with my WoW buddies. Like, are you guys ready? Let's go. Ragnarok won't know what hit him. This is a giant button. Looks like a light bulb, but it's not. It's a giant button. That's what we're testing. What is it? It's a button. You push it. Pretty straightforward. Is it though? What facilitates communication on a button? Well, you press it and then something happens. Okay, sure. So your user can click the button. What else can your user do? Well, there's a difference between mouse down and mouse up. Your user can hover over a button. That communicates intent. That can fire off any number of things. Not all users use a mouse. Not all users have the ability to. So how does a user facilitate communication that way? Oftentimes via focus or screen readers. Key down. Cool. That's a nice healthy list of how the user can communicate. That's just the user. What do we as developers have to communicate with the user through a button? Well, we can change the text. It can say, press me. It can say, delete me. It can say, send all of your money to Jared's bank account. I don't think anybody would press that, but it expresses intent and it's communication. We can change the style. It can be a primary button. It can be a tertiary button. It can be a disabled button. We can be in a loading state. As you can see, that's a bit of a spoiler. As you can see, a button, while a seemingly simple thing, provides a number of ways of communication, which is what we should be testing. So now, time for the live coding portion of the talk. I'm going to take another sip of my delicious water here. And I'm going to let Kermit express how I feel. Awesome. Let's head over here. Whoop. Welcome to the button. What is the button? Well, the button needs to be refreshed. Awesome. You'll notice it says up here, the button is love, but that doesn't matter. Welcome to the button. You can press it as it says, press me. Cool. And down here, we'll see some familiar things. We'll see text, send all your money to Jared. Cool. We will see disabled. Ah, crap, come on. Oh, look, somebody did press it. Nice. And oh no, there's an error. You can't send all your money to Jared. Oh, crap. Well, we'll have to figure out why. There's a secondary button. This should not be a secondary action. And a destructive button, which just doesn't apply. So let's go ahead and reset that button. Back to primary self. Cool, let's put it to loading so you guys got something to look at. Neat. So that is the button. And these are how the we as developers can communicate. This is a handful of ways that we can say, hey, user, here's some things that we want to inform you of or options we want to provide. Cool. So before we go any further, let's take a look at the actual button itself. This is not the whole web page. This is just the button. There we go. Okay. So for those of you that are not familiar with React, I do apologize. At this certain point, you're just going to have to hang on to the train. I will try my best, but hopefully it should still be interesting. And we should get through this part pretty quickly. Testing is pretty straightforward. Cool. So we have a very straightforward component here. We have a button. We have defined that button's props that accepts children, i.e. the text. Is it disabled? Is it loading? This all should look familiar. Does it have an error? And an on-click function. We see that it handles both mouse events and keyboard events. Cool. Our button accepts a type as well. And I have just made a little helper flag here. It's a combination of is loading, is disabled, and has error. I was touching on these a number of times throughout the component. This just kind of cleans it up. So is active wrapped in the use memo, so we don't have any necessary re-renders. We got our click handler, is disabled, is loading, and we have our key down handler. If there was a key down and it was enter, then fire the on click as well. We are using a third-party library here called CX. It's just class names to conditionally render all of these different classes. This is how we get all of our different styles. Again, all memoized. And then down here is the component itself. It's very straightforward. It's just a button with our class names. Disabled, well, if it's not active, then it's disabled. On click, doing handle click, on key down, handle key down. The data test ID of button. Now, what could that be? We're never going to find out, are we? All right, cool. And then we have is loading, which if it is loading, we render the loading component, and otherwise we render the text, children. Sweet. Now, we have been a very, very naughty developer. Why do I say that? Well, because we don't have any tests, and that is a lot of functionality, as we covered. So let's take a look at that. Let's make this a little bit bigger. I'll shrink the tests. I'll shrink the component up here a bit. And we've got a little bit here already laid out for us to discuss. On line number 1, we are importing React testing library. We've finally gotten there, the moment of truth. Boom, we did it. We can use it. What is render? What are we importing? If you're familiar with Enzyme, Enzyme has shallow and mount. There is no equivalent of shallow in React testing library. You render the whole enchilada and everything inside of it, and that's just the way it is. It's meant to more closely resemble how your application will be used. So render does that. So here we have render being used. Let's go ahead and uncomment that. Take a look. So let's ignore the left-hand side. What are we rendering? We are rendering a button, and we are passing it children of text. Oh, sorry, of test. Great. We are taking the returned object, we are destructuring it, and we are removing a utility called getByRole. What does getByRole do? GetByRole does what it says on the tin. It uses ARIA roles to locate buttons. You don't find them by class names. You don't find them by their style IDs. You don't find them by their display names as a component. You will see routinely as we build out these tests that the tests reflect how the user uses your app. Sound familiar? So we're going to get it by role, same as say a screen reader would, to guarantee that it is in the document. So let's go ahead and run that test. And again, we are taking our unit object, our button, we are rendering it. If it had 17 components downstream, the whole thing, and then subjecting it to via Jest DOM, non-simulated events. That will be clearer as we actually start firing events. Cool. So speaking of, how do we find it like a user? Good question. Well, let's do one thing different this time. Let's not destructure render. And let's pass in a button. Cool. Now let's come up here and let's import screen. So what is screen? I like to think of it as renders what's behind the screen, and screen is what was rendered. You can destructure utilities from render, but as you can imagine, if you have a number of different things that you're testing, or you have a number of things of tools that you need to use, and you need to come back and change all your tests, how they're all done, or what have you, going back to everywhere you destructure render wouldn't be the best way to go about it. So the React testing library provides screen, which is essentially the same object returned by render, but with all the utilities. So we can say button equals screen, and this will look very familiar. Screen dot get by role, and we're just going to look for it by its button. Okay, great. Then what do we want to do? We want to expect that the button, oops, so sorry, to be in the document. Now, this isn't testing anything different. I mean, it's not testing the children. This isn't actually doing what the test says. So how do we do that? How do we find a button by text? Well, there's a number of ways that we can do it, but the way recommended by the documentation and the way that I have over here in my cheat sheet that I had previously done, you can provide a name and a regex in order to detect that button. So now, just like the user, I am seeing a button with this text. Thereby, it renders its children. So I expect a button with that text to be in the document. Notice I don't know anything about the internals of this. I don't know how, granted, we're not doing anything complicated. Unable to find an accessible element with the role button and test text. Can anybody spot the issue? I can. Regex was doing its job. Run it one more time. And down here, excellent. All tests are passing. What else do we got? Renders loading. When is loading? Expected to change. Test ID. Cool. So here's an interesting feature. In React Testing Library, you have data test ID. You may have seen it, or if you have a good memory, over here. What is that? What is this? What is this? This is a means for us to attach and locate. It quasi breaks the rules. The rules state tested as a user. The user is not going to look for your test ID. However, the rules also state that your test should be clear and concise. So if I find myself having to locate another component inside of another component and hope that none of that changes, suddenly I'm breaking my own rules. So this felt like a very good candidate trying to find the loading icon. This felt like a good candidate to introduce test ID. So we are going to do the same thing as before. We are going to render button. We're going to say is loading equals true. Let's test. Excellent. Then we are going to let's find the loading icon. Now this is the interesting part. We're going to say screen query by test ID. You can say get by test ID, but get by test ID is for something that you know will be there, or if it isn't there, you want it to break. If it's something conditional, you want to use query. So loading icon can conditionally be there. In this test, I expect it to always be there, but I'm going to use query. So screen query by test ID, and then we provide, if we go to loading. Well, first, let's get in here. Let's say loading icon. Whoops. Where did it go? I have no idea what's happened there, but let's go ahead and make this bigger. All right. Loading icon. Then we're going to say we expect loading icon to be in the document. Cool. So we should find our loading icon and be well on our way. So we've now covered get by role being instantiated via render or brought in via screen. We have, what's going on here? Received value null. Why are we receiving value null? Oh, that's right, because that's what query returns if it doesn't find anything. Well, that's funny. Why wouldn't it find something? Well, our loading icon doesn't have a data test ID. So let's give it a test ID of loading icon. We can expect something like loading to change. Perhaps the animation would change. Perhaps it's no longer a div. Perhaps it's an SVG. Or perhaps the guts of this thing, there's a number of different, UX comes knocking a lot in my fictional head as an excuse for test ID. I really just wanted a reason to show it to you guys. So let's run it again. But yet I have bells in the back of my head going, you don't really need it for this. Expect loading icon to be in the document. Boom. React does not recognize the data test ID prop on a DOM element. This is a mistake I make. I use a capital I instead of a lowercase. So there we go. Make it a little bit bigger. I previously had capital. We're going to go with a lower. Excellent. So there's a lot of other things that we can test. Let me go ahead and copy all of this over here. Oh, wait, more tests. Oh, yeah, I have a very thorough documentation that we still have to go through. So hopefully you guys don't have any meetings after this, because we still have to test all of the things. So clear off your calendars. This weekend is mine. I'm co-opting it. We will watch Spider-Man 2 at some point for a break. Sorry, that's totally tangent. All right, there we go. Here is the tests that we could write. Now, granted, these tests are very atomic. You could, for example, combine all, you see a bunch of defaults, does not load by default, is not disabled by default, does not have error by default. I find it useful, if not useful, I find it necessary, to be frank with you. If I'm testing a new piece of functionality and I'm going to test that that piece of functionality is there, well, now suddenly there is a default case. So I should test that default case. I should ensure that, as otherwise I might just be testing that thing is always there. So where there is a test case where you are saying this piece of functionality is active, you should then also apply a test for is not active. As error, as secondary, you'll see here I'm using classes, not to have class, to have class. That comes down to, there is a to have style method that is provided by RTL. This is a matter of preference as best I can tell. Which do I expect to change more? The details of my styling or my class names? I would probably say the details of my styling. So I chose to go with class names, but we could check when there's an error, does it have a red error border? This is checking if there's an error class. Again, there's no silver bullet for everything, but it is highly opinionated that it should be from the perspective of a user. Speaking of, here's the last test that I wanted to show you. Let's zoom in here real quick. It fires on click when clicked. So on click, we fire up a jest function, which we can then reference later. It provides us a number of utilities. We then create our user. We set our user up. That user has a user event, method of setup. We render out our button. We find our button, and we await a user click. You'll notice this is just an async function. So we can await the user click to propagate through the system, and then we can expect that on click to have been called. We can then do things like on click when disabled. We can do things like don't fire on click when loading. Loading is true, on click of the button, expect it to not have been called. We can check things like focus, when focus is disabled. Fires on click when focus and enter is pressed. Here, we're getting the button, we're simulating a tab because there's only one element that we are rendering. It's only going to tab to the button. And then we press enter using these standardized key codes. And we expect it to have been called. So you'll see a pattern here, one that I've been repeating, and that is test from the user's perspective. Test what facilitates communication. You no longer need to be nervous there, Kermit. But I tell you what I do need. I need a drink. So now with our delicious lunches behind us, my giant glass of water behind me, let's wrap up. Testing isn't hard. It just takes skills, and they are skills you can acquire. I equate testing to Git. Git was very intimidating. Git got in my way until it didn't. And now I don't work without them or without it. In the JavaScript world, TypeScript, same thing. TypeScript got in my way until it didn't. Testing the same thing. You thought I forgot rule number 3, didn't you? Rule number 3, tests are living documentation. Tests are super comments, guys. Tests are the most up-to-date comments that I can think of. Unless I go look at git blame or the file history, I can't tell that this comment is still valid. If somebody left a 4-line comment explaining how a function and subsequent functions work, unless I wrote that, or I saw the PR that included it and I'm working on it immediately thereafter, it's very hard for me to trust comment. However, tests provide living documentation so long as they are clear, concise, and kept up to date. And since they're important, they should be. So a quick refresher of the rules. Rule number 1, testing is important. Rule number 2, test what facilitates communication regardless of library, regardless of RTL or Enzyme or Cypress or Jasmine, whatever. If you're testing UI components, test what facilitates communication with you and your user. And so long as those tests do their job well and are kept up to date, they are the best documentation that you can have. Some might say you should write your tests first, but that is perhaps a topic left for another time. I hope you've enjoyed this talk. I've enjoyed giving it. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. I'm not going to walk off the screen this time, though, so I'm just going to stand here awkward. Do I just hang up now? Is that just what I do?
We're going to see if there's any questions.
Oh, that's right. Are there any questions? I did ask for a list of them. Any questions?
Room here.
I'm just curious what IDE you were using. Was that Visual Studio Code?
That was WebStorm, JetBrains.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I know Ed was remarking on my whiteboard earlier, just to show that it's not like, you know, a green screen effect. Woo! I mean, it's actually there. Any questions, anybody?
Yeah, I got a question, Jerry. What would you say is the learning curve on RTL? I mean, from knowing not much about it to being pretty productive.
I think RTL benefited a lot from Enzyme's mistakes. I can only speak from a person who knew Enzyme beforehand. I found getting into the swing of it not frustrating, but it was definitely a mind shift for me. So people coming new into it might not have that. And thinking of it from a user's perspective, which they do from their homepage, I think really helps with bringing people into the mental swim lane required to adopt it more quickly. And I think the charts, the data that we showed earlier shows that it's just, people seem to get into it quicker. And I think that's great.
I was gonna say, how much do you think of that is because if somebody Google searches React test library, this one will come up first.
I mean, it is a really good name. You can't get much better SEO than that.
That's just something to say. Thank you. Cool. All right, thanks, Jared.
Thank you all very much.
This was recorded and it'll be out on our YouTube channel soon.
Tell him to stop recording.
I'll stop recording.
Oh, you recorded?